In a dimly lit classroom on the bustling planet of Klyron, the Cloud Talk veteran stood before a group of eager students, his three clawed hands resting uneasily on the edge of a worn podium. The air buzzed with the restless energy of youth, the young Cloud Talk students shifting in their seats, their bulbous eyes glinting with curiosity. One of them, a bold little creature with twitching antennae, raised a claw and piped up, "Sir, tell us about the war on Vexus 7. The veteran's voice came out rough, like gravel scraped across metal, tinged with a bitterness he couldn't hide. "It's not worth talking about. Ask something else." But the students wouldn't let it go. Their claws shot up, a forest of sharp points, their chittering voices rising in a chorus of excitement. He sighed, defeated. The past he'd buried for decades clawed its way back to the surface. The Cloud Talk veteran wasn't just any old soldier. He'd once been a commander, a proud leader of an elite squad in the sprawling empire of his people. Back then, he'd worn his gleaming armor like a second skin, trusted the unbreakable plasma shields of his kind, and believed in the destiny of the Cloud Talk to dominate the stars. Vexus 7 had been their target, a grimy industrial rock orbiting a dying star, home to massive energy plants that churned out power for the native worn. It wasn't a prize worth bragging about, just another notch in the Empire's belt. But that mission had changed everything. The humans, those strange, two-legged beings with a relentless will, had left a mark on him he couldn't erase. He glanced at the students, their faces alight with anticipation, and muttered, "You really want to hear it? Fine. Don't expect a hero's tale." Years ago, he'd stood on the front lines of that ill-fated conquest, certain of victory. The Cloud Talk had swept in with ruthless precision, their ships darkening the sky as they razed Vorn settlements to ash. He'd led his squad to secure the main energy plant, a hulking fortress of steel and humming reactors. The plan was simple: take the planet, strip its resources, and move on. His commanding officer, General Varkis, had barked orders with the confidence of a man who'd never tasted defeat. "We're the rulers of this galaxy," Varkis had said, his voice booming over the comms. The Cloud Talk veteran had nodded, trusting every word. He'd felt invincible behind their plasma shields, a wall of light no weapon could pierce, or so he thought. But the Vorn weren't alone. That was the fatal mistake. The Cloud Talk hadn't known that the natives had forged a pact with humans mere hours before the invasion. The veteran still remembered the moment it all went wrong. He'd been checking perimeter defenses with his closest friend, Jace, when a shadow loomed overhead. A colossal ship, bigger than anything in their fleet, punched through the atmosphere. "What in the void is that?" Jace had sneered, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Some oversized junk heap." The veteran hadn't answered. A chill had settled in his gut, a warning he couldn't shake. He'd fought in dozens of campaigns, faced countless enemies, but nothing had prepared him for what came next. Now, standing in front of these kids, he felt the weight of that day pressing down on him. The students leaned forward, their chatter dying down as they sensed a shift in his mood. He rubbed a scarred claw across his chest, where his old uniform once hung pristine, and let out a long breath. "I've told this story too many times," he said, more to himself than to them. "But you won't understand unless you hear it all, the blood, the shame, the humans." His voice cracked on that last word, and the room fell silent. They didn't know what they were asking for, didn't know how deep the wound still ran. But they'd asked, and he'd answer. "It started with pride," he began, "and it ended with something I never saw coming." The Cloud Talk veteran's voice grew steadier as he launched into the tale, though a flicker of unease lingered in his eyes. "Vexus 7 wasn't much to look at," he said, addressing the wide-eyed students. "A dust-choked rock with energy plants spitting out power for the Vorn. We didn't care about them. To us, it was just another target." The Cloud Talk Empire had set its sights on the planet's reactors, hungry for the fuel that could power their war machine. The order came straight from the top: seize it, break it, claim it. The veteran had led his squad into the fray, a pack of seasoned fighters armed with plasma rifles and shielded by technology they thought unbeatable. "We hit them hard and fast," he said. That's how we did things back then. The invasion kicked off like clockwork. Cloud Talk ships roared down from orbit, their engines shaking the ground as they unloaded troops. The Vorn didn't stand a chance, or so it seemed. The veteran remembered barking orders over the comms, directing his squad to lock down the main energy plant. General Varkis, his commanding officer, had been in high spirits, strutting around the command deck like a king. "This is ours by right," Varkis had declared, his voice thick with pride. "No one stops the Cloud Talk." The veteran had believed it, too. He'd positioned his team around the plant, plasma shields humming to life, forming a glowing barrier against the Vorn's pitiful counterattacks. Their weapons barely scratched the surface. It was over before it started, he told the students, his tone flat. But arrogance blinded them. The Cloud Talk hadn't bothered to scout properly, hadn't caught wind of the Vorn's desperate new alliance. "We didn't know about the humans," the veteran said, pausing as the students shifted uneasily. Not until it was too late. He'd been at the plant's perimeter, running checks with Jace, his right-hand man, when the sky changed. A massive shape broke through the haze, a Terran Vanguard force ship, a hulking beast of metal that dwarfed their own fleet. Jace had laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "What's that supposed to be?" "A flying scrap pile." The veteran hadn't joined in. His gut twisted as he watched the ship hover, silent and menacing. "I told him to shut up and get ready," he said. Something felt off. The first wave hit minutes later. The Vorn had been a pushover, but this was different. The humans didn't waste time with warnings. Smaller craft poured out of the mothership, streaking toward the surface like darts. The veteran had yelled for his squad to tighten the line, plasma rifles powering up. "We thought our shields would hold," he said bitterly. "We'd never lost with them before." General Varkis came over the comms, his voice sharp. "Wipe them out. They are nothing." The veteran had relayed the order, but doubt gnawed at him. The humans weren't charging in blind like the Vorn. They moved with purpose, and that scared him more than he'd admit. The Cloud Talk squad braced for impact, shields flaring brighter as the first human ships touched down. "We saw them up close then," the veteran said, his claws flexing at the memory. Two-legged, armored, moving like they owned the place. He'd expected a full-on assault, something they could crush with superior numbers. Instead, the humans played it smart. They didn't swarm. They didn't need to. It was chaos from the start, he admitted. His squad fired wildly, plasma bolts lighting up the air, but the humans' armor shrugged it off. The veteran caught glimpses of them, small groups darting forward, always advancing, never stopping. "You couldn't pin them down," he said. "By the time you aimed, they were somewhere else." Jace had been cocky, stepping out to take a shot. "I'll show them," he'd growled, lining up a human in his sights. The veteran had shouted a warning, but it was too late. A crack split the air, and Jace's head vanished in a spray of violet blood. "That's when I knew," the veteran said, his voice dropping low. "We weren't fighting amateurs." General Varkis screamed over the comms, demanding a counterattack, but the squad was already fraying. Some wanted to push forward, others hesitated, eyes darting to the growing pile of bodies. The humans hadn't even broken a sweat, and the Cloud Talk's perfect plan was crumbling. "Pride got us there," the veteran told the students. "But it wouldn't get us out." The Cloud Talk veteran's voice hardened as he leaned into the story, his claws tapping the podium like a drumbeat of dread. "We didn't have a clue what we were up against," he said, locking eyes with the students. "Not until the humans hit us full force." The classroom was dead quiet now, the kids hanging on every word as he relived the moment Vexus 7 turned into a slaughterhouse. The Terran Vanguard force didn't mess around. That monster of a ship hovering overhead had unleashed a swarm of smaller craft, and before the Cloud Talk could blink, human boots were on the ground. "It wasn't a fight," the veteran said grimly. "It was a reckoning." The first wave landed hard and fast. The veteran had been barking orders, trying to hold the line around the energy plant, when the humans spilled out of their ships. Armored head to toe, they moved like ghosts, smooth, deliberate, lethal. Our plasma rifles lit up the air, he said. But it was like shooting at shadows. The Cloud Talk weapons, so deadly against the Vorn, barely scratched the humans' gear. Bolts fizzled out against their armor, and the enemy kept coming. 2 or 3 at a time, they'd break off, darting forward in random bursts, never giving a clear target. You'd line up a shot, and bam, they were gone, he said, snapping his claws for emphasis. Then you'd hear the crack of their guns. Those guns were something else. Kinetic rounds, fast and brutal, punched through Cloud Talk soldiers like paper. The veterans saw it happen, too many times. 1 second, you're standing next to a guy you've known for years, he said, his voice dropping. The next, his head's gone. He'd watched a squad mate, a tough bastard named Rin, take a round right through the chest. Blood sprayed across the plasma shield, sizzling as it hit the energy field. General Varkis was still yelling over the comms, his voice a frantic roar. Push them back. They're nothing. But the veteran knew better. Varkis hadn't seen the bodies piling up yet. The humans didn't just charge in blind. They split their forces, a third of them peeling off with some kind of jet gear strapped to their backs. They flew, the veteran said, shaking his head. Right up the side of the plant, like it was nothing. They landed high, perching on the steel framework, and started raining hell down from above. Bullets tore into the Cloud Talk's exposed flank, shredding through armor and flesh. We couldn't shoot back fast enough, he said. They had the angle, and we were sitting ducks. Panic ripped through the squad. Some fired blindly at the shadows overhead, others ducked behind the shields, shouting at each other to hold the line. It was falling apart. General Varkis finally saw the mess. Regroup. Get those bastards off the high ground, he screamed, but his voice cracked with desperation. The veteran tried to rally the squad, yelling for them to focus fire. We've got the shields, he'd shouted, clinging to the one thing he thought could save them. But the humans didn't care. Their rounds didn't need to break the plasma wall, they just waited for a head to pop up too long. Another soldier, a young kid named Milo, poked out to take a shot. His skull exploded before he could pull the trigger. 10 guys, the veteran said, his eyes distant. I counted 10 go down like that. The squad started cracking. We're done for, a lieutenant named Kess hollered, throwing down his rifle. We can't win this. Others turned on him, claws slashing in rage. Coward. Fight or die, someone yelled back, and a scuffle broke out, Cloud Talk tearing into Cloud Talk while the humans closed in. The veteran waded in, shoving them apart. Stop it. We need every gun, he roared, but the damage was done. Discipline was gone, and the humans knew it. Their main force let out a guttural battle cry, loud enough to shake the ground over the gunfire. Assault through, they bellowed, and then they charged. The veteran froze as the humans surged forward, a wall of armor and death. Explosions rocked the plant, debris raining down as their weapons tore into everything. It was like staring into a storm, he told the students, his voice barely above a whisper. Unstoppable. General Varkis's comms cut out mid-sentence, a wet gurgle, then silence. The chain of command was toast. The humans were 50 yards out, then 30, then 20. They were going to overrun us, the veteran said, his claws digging into the podium. And we had nothing left. The Cloud Talk veteran's voice trembled as he reached the breaking point of his story, his eyes darting across the silent classroom. We were done, he said, the words heavy with the weight of that day on Vexus 7. The humans were closing in, and we had nothing left to throw at them. The energy plant was a graveyard now, smoking ruins, bodies strewn across the ground, plasma shields flickering as power drained. The students stared, claws twitching, waiting for what came next. He took a shaky breath. I'd lost everyone who mattered. General Varkis was dead. The lieutenants, the squad leaders, gone. It was just me and a handful of stragglers, staring down the barrel of the end. The humans weren't slowing down. Their armored figures loomed closer, boots pounding the dirt, weapons spitting fire. The veteran could still hear the screams of his squad, the ones who hadn't made it. They didn't stop, he said. Not for a second. Always moving, always shooting. He ducked behind a crumbling shield, clutching his rifle, watching the chaos unfold. Terra, his last friend standing, crouched beside him, her breathing ragged. "We're dead if we stay here," she'd hissed, her voice sharp with fear. But the veteran's mind was racing, grasping at straws. He'd heard a rumor once, from a half-crazed traitor on an outpost, something about humans and a thing called surrender. It sounded insane, weak, against every fiber of Cloud Talk honor. "Fight or die," he muttered to himself. That's all we knew. But dying wasn't an option anymore, not when he could still save someone. "I had to do something," he told the students, his tone raw. "Anything." He glanced at Terra, her eyes blazing with defiance. "We're not running," she snapped, gripping her rifle tighter. "We fight." The veteran shook his head. "Fighting's what got us here," he shot back. The humans were 20 yards out, their shouts ringing in his ears. He made up his mind. "I remember that traitor's story," he said. "Humans don't shoot if you give up." I figured it was our only shot. Tara's jaw dropped. "Give up? You're out of your damn mind," she yelled, lunging to grab his arm. He jerked away, already tearing at his uniform. He ripped off a strip of white fabric, his officer's sash, stained with dirt and blood, and tied it around the barrel of his rifle. "This is it," he said, more to himself than her. Terra clawed at him, furious. "You'll get us all killed." "They'll see it as weakness," she roared, her voice cracking. The others nearby, a ragged bunch of survivors, turned on him too. "Traitor," one spat, a soldier named Dorn, swinging a fist. The veteran ducked, shoving Dorn back. "I'm saving you, you idiot," he barked, his temper flaring. The group erupted, some sided with Terra, cursing him, others just stared, too broken to care. A rifle butt slammed into his shoulder, but he shook it off, adrenaline pumping. "I didn't have time to argue," he told the students, his claws flexing at the memory. They were on us. The humans were 10 yards away, a wall of death closing in. He gripped his makeshift flag, heart pounding, and stood up. "Stop," he shouted, stepping out from the shield, waving the white cloth high. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing his arm, but he didn't flinch. Terra grabbed at his legs, trying to drag him down. "Get back here, you fool," she screamed, her voice hoarse. He kicked free, planting himself in the open. "I'm done fighting," he yelled, not even sure they'd understand. Then it happened. The gunfire stopped. The humans froze, weapons still raised, but no one pulled a trigger. The veteran stood there, chest heaving, the flag trembling in his grip. "It worked," he said, his voice barely a whisper. A single human stepped forward, towering and calm, his face hidden behind a visor. "We accept your unconditional surrender," the man said, his tone flat, like it was routine. The veteran sank to his knees, relief crashing over him. Behind him, Terra let out a guttural snarl, shoving past to swing her rifle at the human. "No," the veteran shouted, tackling her down. "It's over." The survivors glared at him, a mix of hate and exhaustion in their eyes. Dorn spat on the ground, muttering, "Coward." Terra wrenched free, turning her back. "You sold us out," she hissed. The veteran didn't argue. "Maybe I did," he said to the students, his gaze distant. "But I kept them alive." The humans moved in, disarming what was left of the squad, and the fight drained out of Vexus 7. "I won by losing," he said, the words tasting bitter. "And it tore us apart." The Cloud Talk veteran's voice softened as he moved past the surrender, his eyes narrowing with the sting of what came next. The humans didn't kill us, he said, facing the students. That's the part I still can't wrap my head around. The classroom was hushed, the kids' claws stilled as they listened. On Vexus 7, after he'd waved that white flag, the Terran Vanguard force took over with eerie calm. They rounded up the surviving Cloud Talk, stripped their weapons, and set up a camp right there among the wreckage of the energy plant. They didn't gloat, he said. Didn't even yell. Just got to work. The humans questioned each prisoner, built shelters, and, strangest of all, started helping the Vorn patch up what was left of their home. I'd never seen anything like it, he admitted. Mercy from an enemy? But that mercy didn't follow him back to Klyron. We got shipped home eventually, he said, his tone turning sour. The humans loaded us onto one of their transports, dropped us at an outpost, and took off without a word. He'd stepped off that ship expecting a hero's welcome, or at least some kind of understanding. Instead, he got a fist to the face. The second my boots hit the ground, someone clocked me, he said, rubbing a claw along his jaw. Called me a coward right there in front of everybody? The crowd at the outpost, soldiers, civilians, even kids, had turned on him. Traitor, they shouted, spitting at his feet. You sold us out. He'd tried to explain, but no one listened. They didn't care that I'd saved lives, he said. All they saw was the white flag. Terra was the worst of it. She'd survived Vexus 7, but whatever bond they'd had was dead. She wouldn't even look at me, he told the students, his voice tight. Walked right past like I was nothing. Later, she cornered him outside a barracks, her eyes blazing with hate. You think you're some kind of savior, she'd snarled, shoving him against the wall. You're a disgrace. We should have died out there. He'd pushed back, just enough to break free. I kept you breathing, he'd shot back, but she'd already turned away, muttering, not worth it. That cut deeper than any bullet. She was all I had left, he said quietly. And she hated me for it. The rest of Klyron wasn't much better. Word spread fast, he said. By the next day, I was the guy who surrendered. His family shut him out, his mate wouldn't open the door, his kids wouldn't speak his name. They acted like I'd betrayed the whole damn empire, he said, bitterness seeping through. Old squad mates, the few who'd made it back, avoided him like a disease. At first, he tried to defend himself, telling anyone who'd listen about the humans' unbeatable strength. No one cared, he said. They just wanted a scapegoat. The medal he'd once worn with pride stayed buried in a drawer, untouched. Then the real trouble started. Not everyone was happy to let it go, he said, his voice dropping low. A group of hardliners, ex-soldiers and fanatics, started whispering about revenge. They called themselves the Cleansers, he explained. Said I'd tainted Cloud Talk honor. One night, he woke up to a brick through his window, a note tied to it, traitors pay. The next week, someone torched his storage shed. I knew it was them, he said. Terra wouldn't join something like that, but plenty of others did. He started sleeping with a knife under his bunk, jumping at every shadow. I'd saved them from the humans, he said, and now they wanted me dead. The veteran leaned forward, his claws gripping the podium. I didn't regret it, not then, he told the students. I'd bought us a second chance, even if they couldn't see it. But the cost was piling up. Every day was a fight, he said. Not with guns, but with looks, words, threats. The Cleansers weren't subtle, they'd follow him in the streets, hissing insults, daring him to snap. I kept my head down, he said. What else could I do? The humans had let him live, but back home, he was a ghost, haunting a life that didn't want him. I thought that was the worst of it, he said, a grim edge creeping into his voice. I was wrong. The Cloud Talk veteran's voice grew heavy as he reached the end of his tale. his eyes clouded with a mix of pride and pain. Years passed, he said, facing the students. I thought I'd seen the worst, hated, hunted, cast out. But the universe wasn't done with me. The classroom was still, the kids' usual chatter replaced by a tense silence as they sensed a shift. Klyron had settled into an uneasy peace, the memory of Vexus 7 fading for most. I kept to myself, he said. Tried to live quiet, out of sight. But trouble found him again, bigger than before. The Zethra came, he said, his claws tightening on the podium. And they didn't care about our shields or our pride. The Zethra were a nightmare, hulking, insect-like raiders who'd been eyeing Klyron's resources for decades. When they hit, it was brutal. They tore through our outer colonies, the veteran said. Slaughtered anyone in their way. The Cloud Talk Empire scrambled to fight back, but their forces were stretched thin, still licking wounds from past wars. I watched it happen, he said. Reports came in towns burning, families gone. The cleansers, those fanatics who'd hounded him, were out there too, stirring up panic, blaming him for weakening the empire. They said I'd cursed us, he muttered. That surrender made us soft. He'd had enough. I knew who could help, he told the students, his voice firming up. The humans. He'd seen their strength, their mercy, firsthand on Vexus 7. They'd let us live once, he said. I figured they might do more. So he acted. Alone, he rigged an old comms unit and sent a signal into Terran space, a plea for aid. This is Cloud Talk veteran, he'd said, voice steady despite the risk. Klyron's dying. We need you. Days later, a response crackled through. Hold on, a human voice said. We're coming. The Terran Vanguard force arrived, fast ships cutting through the sky, troops hitting the ground. They smashed the Zethra, he said. Pushed them back like they were nothing. The humans didn't stop there. They stayed, he said. Helped us rebuild, set up defenses. Klyron survived because of them. I thought maybe, just maybe, that'd changed things, he said. Maybe they'd see what I'd done. He was wrong. The council, the big shots running the empire, saw the humans as a threat to their control. They didn't like owing anyone, he said bitterly. Especially not me. Whispers turned into plans. The cleansers got wind of his call to the humans and fed the council a twisted story. He'd sold out Klyron again, invited invaders in. It was a lie, he said, but they ate it up. One night, they came for him. I was asleep when the door crashed in, he said. Council guards, armed to the teeth. They dragged him out, claws cutting into his arms, and hauled him before the leaders. You've doomed us, a council elder hissed, his voice dripping with venom. The Zethra want blood for this. The veteran fought back, shouting, I saved you. The humans saved you. But they'd already made a deal. They handed me over, he said, his voice breaking. Traded me to the Zethra for peace. The humans protested, but the council shut them out, eager to wash their hands of the mess. The Zethra didn't waste time. They took me to their ship, he said. Bound me up, put me on my knees. A crowd of Cloud Talk watched from a distance, some cheering, some silent. Tara was there, her face hard as stone. She didn't say a word, he said. Just looked away. The Zethra leader, a towering thing with jagged mandibles, raised a blade. For your betrayal, it rasped, and swung. I didn't scream, the veteran said, his voice steady now. I smiled. I'd won again by losing. The blade fell, and that was it. He paused, letting the silence sink in. Klyron's safe now, he said. The humans and Cloud Talk are buddies, trade deals, alliances, the works. But no one remembers me. The students shifted, uneasy. They think some council genius pulled it off, he said, a dry laugh escaping. Not the traitor who begged for help. He stepped back, claws dropping to his sides. That's the story, he finished. No medals, no glory. Just a ghost who gave everything. The door creaked open, and a human officer walked in, grinning at the kids. They cheered, oblivious. The veteran's tale was done, buried, like him, in the ashes of a war no one cared to understand. And there you have it, the Cloud Talk veteran's forgotten sacrifice, lost in the stars. Crazy, right? What do you think? Did he get a raw deal, or was it worth it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, I read every one. If you love this HFY twist, smash that like button, hit subscribe to Sci-Fi Space, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next epic tale. See you in the cosmos.